can we give another 2 minutes so that the participants are joining? So,
okay, sure.
sir, you can start.
Sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to live webinar on updates on effective prevention and management of post-transplant fungal infection. This program has been brought to you courtesy Intas. My name is Manoj. I'm Senior Vice President with Intas Pharmaceuticals. It's my honor and privilege to welcome all of you here this evening. We have two experts speaking to us on this important update. The first expert today is Dr. A.B. Abraham, Director and Chief Nephrology and Renal Transplant Services at prestigious Lakeshore Hospital. And post Dr. A.B. Abraham, we have another expert, Dr. Rahul Bhargav, Director and Head, Department of Hemato-Oncology and Bone Marrow Transplant at prestigious Fortis, Gurgaon. Gentlemen, we intend to finish this entire CME by 7:30 plus minus few minutes. An honor and privilege to introduce to you Dr. A.B. Abraham. Dr. Abraham is Director and Chief Nephrology and Renal Transplant Services at prestigious Lakeshore Hospital, Cochin, Kerala, India. More than 25 years of experience both as clinician and academician with wide experience in renal transplant, critical care nephrology, vasculitis, lupus, and electrolyte disorders. Dr. A.B. Abraham was previously associated with CMC Vellore as Associate Professor of Nephrology, in charge of one of the busiest renal transplant center in southern India, has performed or coordinated nearly 1,700 renal transplant till now. So he has touched life of close to 2,000 families. Dr. A.B. Abraham expertise is in the management of high-risk transplant, including sensitized, elderly, and children. Has multiple publications which are often cited and a regular faculty in regional and national conferences. Dr. A.B. Abraham received fellowship from Indian Society of Nephrology, American Society of Nephrology, and Royal College of Physicians, Glasgow. Sir, an honor and privilege to invite you for your talk today.
Good evening, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes,
Hello?
sir, you are.
Yes, sir,
you are.
You are audible, sir.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. At the outset, let me thank Intas team for giving me this opportunity to give this lecture. and thank you for the generous introduction. Several advances have been made in the field of organ transplantation in the last couple of decades. Very effective immunosuppressive agents are available now, and patients with the multiple comorbid conditions are increasingly being accepted for organ transplantation. Consequently, we have an increase in the number of infections, bacterial, viral, as well as fungal infections, which we have to deal with. And today's talk is on post-transplant fungal infections. This is a data from one of the prestigious for some of the few prestigious centers in Europe, 17 transplant centers with 429 patients and more than 500 episodes of invasive mycosis or deep fungal infections. And what all this found was that the predominant or important infections were invasive candidiasis, aspergillosis, cryptococcal infection, and other mold infections. And the mortality was approximately 30%. So which means invasive mycosis or deep fungal infection, it's a serious condition. It has to be recognized sufficiently early and treated. Otherwise, it may be associated with a significant mortality. There is similar observation from US also. This is data from 23 transplant centers in US. And what they also found was that there is the predominant infections were candidiasis, aspergillosis, zygomycosis, cryptococcosis, etc. And as in the previous study, invasive candidiasis was the most frequent infections, excepting in lung transplant recipients where aspergillus infection was the most frequent one. In the previous study also, among the lung transplant recipient, it was the aspergillus infection which is more frequent as compared to other type of fungal infection. But in all other category of organ transplant recipient, it was invasive candidiasis which is the most frequent fungal infection. These are data from Christian Medical College, Vellore. I'm also one of the co-authors of this study. This was published in Transplantation 2003, and this study looked at nearly 2,000 renal transplant recipients over a period of 2 decades. And what we found was that the important fungal infections were aspergillus, cryptococcus, then candida. Pneumocystis was also characterized, classified as a fungus. Then zygomycetes, which includes mucor and several other type of molds also. This is a retrospective study. Hence, it is possible that the candida infection was probably missed out. Otherwise, in any cohort of transplant recipients, it is the candidiasis, invasive candidiasis, which is the most frequent type of fungal infection. So which are the most frequent or common fungal infections in kidney transplant recipients? Of course, candida. There are several species of candida can cause infections like candida albicans, candida tropicalis, candida parapsilosis, Guillermondi, glabrata, etc. Then aspergillus, cryptococcus, then zygomycetes like mucor and rhizopus can cause infections in total organ transplant recipients, which can be associated with significant morbidity and mortality. And there are other molds like fusarium and pseudosporium, which are being increasingly recognized nowadays. I'll present a case now. This is a patient who presented to us with a problem. This particular patient is a 40-year-old gentleman who is a diabetic. He received a renal transplant at another center. Donor was his brother. His immunosuppression consisted of basiliximab as induction immunosuppression, and he was on tacrolimus, mycophenolic acid, and steroids. He presented with a 2 weeks history of dyspnea and hemoptysis, and further evaluation showed right upper lobe consolidation. And they had done a bronchial biopsy that is unremarkable. He presented to our center for further management and treatment. clinical examination showed reduced air entry in the right upper lobe. So this is the chest X-ray. He had significantly impaired renal function at the time of presentation. Creatinine was 5.4, and all the other cultures were negative. So this is the HRCT chest, which shows necrotic areas in the lungs. So the patient was initiated on broad spectrum antibiotics, and possibility of pulmonary mucormycosis was considered, and he was initiated on liposomal amphotericin and posaconazole. Since he had significant renal dysfunction, renal replacement therapy was also initiated. However, despite after 2 weeks of therapy, the HRCT showed progression of the right lung lesion with new infiltrates in the left lung base. So hence we decided to proceed with the surgical help, and right lobectomy was done, and this is what the lobectomy showed. It showed lung alveolar spaces with extensive necrosis, and further evaluation showed broad non-septate fungal hyphae within the necrotic tissue and fungi invading vessel. This appearance is very much suggestive of mucormycosis. So this is a classical presentation of pulmonary mucormycosis, which occurred in a patient with renal transplant. This patient hadn't received any extra immunosuppression. For example, he had just received the baseline immunosuppression, and he was doing fairly well with the maintenance immunosuppression. The point I'm making here is that some of these fungal infections can occur in even the so-called stable renal transplant recipients with good graft function, even though they haven't received any extra immunosuppression. So this is something which has to be kept in mind. So what we did was the surgical excision of the lesion was done. We continued with the prolonged antifungal therapy, which included liposomal amphotericin. And once the patient became stable, we switched to oral posaconazole, which was continued up in 2 to 3 months. And repeat HRCT showed full resolution of the lesions. Patient improved, but the graft failed, and he had to be put on maintenance hemodialysis. Pulmonary mucormycosis is a major life-threatening condition, and in my experience, only very few patients have survived. This is one of those. Unless you intervene very early and with a lot of aggression, you are likely to lose the patient. This is the data from this is an article in which 174 renal transplant recipients were studied. It was taken from 123 articles published from 1970 to 2015. As you can see from this publication, the most important site of pulmonary infection was mucormycosis was pulmonary, and then rhinocerebral. Pulmonary and rhinocerebral. Important thing is to note that some patients had graft infection with mucormycosis also. I think PGI Chandigarh has reported a few cases of renal mucormycosis in renal transplant recipient. So a patient presenting with a graft failure with the ultrasound or CT showing diffuse enlargement of the graft, this is one possibility that has to be considered. So the treatment of mucormycosis in renal transplant recipients, the most frequent pathogen was Rhizopus, followed by Mucor species. And the treatment they received were amphotericin, amphotericin B, or the regular amphotericin, and then some patients received a lipid amphotericin, that is a liposomal amphotericin, and few received posaconazole, voriconazole, echinocandin also, and few underwent surgery, and combination of patients had to undergo both surgery and receive antifungal therapy. So this is, involved treatment of mucormycosis is both surgical and medical. Surgical involves resection of the involved part and aggressive antifungal therapy to start with liposomal amphotericin, and the next drug which is suggested is just become available to us is posaconazole. So what are the risk factors for deep mycosis in solid organ transplant recipients? One is next state of immunosuppression. Patients who develop rejection episodes, they may require repeating dose of high dose steroids or depleting antibodies like ATG, that is thymoglobulin. So this can further deplete their depress their immune system. CMV infection, presence of CMV infection can further predispose to other infection. CMV is an immunomodulating virus. So if a patient presents to a transplant center with fever, and if CMV is documented, it's an indication for looking for other infections as well, because presence of CMV means the patient is at a higher risk of developing other types of infection, including bacterial and fungal infection. Presence of renal failure. Whenever patients renal transplant or any organ transplant recipients develop renal failure as a complication of the infection or therapy, that also increases the immunosuppressive state, which can actually lead to fungal infection. Presence of liver failure, liver dysfunction, then infection with the hepatotropic viruses like hepatitis B and C, diabetes. These are also immunosuppressing conditions, which are also major risk factors for deep mycosis in solid organ transplant recipients. Of course, the technical and anatomical abnormalities also can contribute to infections like presence of vascular access devices, drainage catheters which are not clean, then intensity of environmental exposure. For example, many of these fungi are naturally occurring organisms in our environment. They are there in the soil, they are there attached to the plant, they are there in the bird droppings. So increased environmental exposure can predispose to fungal infection. Within the hospital also, if the air conditioning system is not clean, various fungi like Aspergilli and mold, various types of mold can grow inside the air conditioned compartment. That also can lead to increased frequency of deep mycosis among solid organ transplant recipients. So what are the sources of Aspergilli in hospital environment? Dust dislodging during construction activity. Most of the hospitals have some ongoing construction activity as requested by various departments for expansion of those departments. Then unfiltered air. It's not possible to completely filter the air in the hospital system. Ventilation system may not be up to the mark. Even carpets may not be cleaned on a regular basis. This can hold or can be a good culture medium for the fungal organism. Even ornamental plants and water system also can be source of Aspergilli in the hospital environment. So if you look at the fungal infections, at one end of the spectrum, you have Candida infection, and then other end, you have infections with molds like aspergillosis and zygomycosis. In medical ICU, surgical ICU, and in a solid organ transplant recipient like renal transplant patient, in the beginning stage is often candidiasis. But with decreasing further reduction of the immunity, with more doses of depleting antibodies or patient developing rejection episode requiring multiple doses of steroid, there is further reduction of the immunity, and this can predispose to aspergillosis and zygomycosis. And of course, patients in the hematological wards and patients with malignancy undergoing chemotherapy are also at a very high risk of developing this kind of aspergillosis and zygomycosis. Another important thing which we have to note is the changing epidemiology of fungal pathogens. New classes of emerging fungal species with high mortality rates are increasingly being recognized. This includes Pseudosporium, then Fusarium. Our center itself, I've seen about a few cases of Fusarium in the last couple of years, maybe I think quite a few number, with significant morbidity and mortality. So as treating clinicians, we need to be aware of this and we need to be aware of this, the existence of the pathogens. Then once these pathogens are identified, appropriate antifungal agents have to be initiated. The drug of choice for Pseudosporium and Fusarium is actually voriconazole. Cryptococcus is a major infection which can complicate renal transplant recipients. It presents primarily as cryptococcal meningitis, but this need not be the only manifestation. Sometimes this can present as disseminated infection. I've seen quite a few patients with pulmonary cryptococcosis, cryptococcus affecting the lymph nodes, cryptococcus in the subcutaneous tissue presenting as an abscess, etc. This is associated with considerable morbidity and mortality. And this can occur in stable patients. In fact, often this is as a result of environmental exposure, like exposure to bird droppings, etc. And the treatment of choice is fluconazole, then amphotericin, and flucytosine. And calcineurins have a favorable effect on cryptococcosis. Actually, in the 90s, I recall when I was doing my DM in 93 and 94, and subsequently when I was working as a consultant also in CMC Vellore, we used to get a lot of patients with cryptococcosis. After 2000, the numbers with cryptococcal infections have come down. This may be because of the fact that patients are being put on calcineurin inhibitors like cyclosporin and tacrolimus more often, which may have a favorable antifungal property, direct antifungal property. This may be the reason for the reduced incidence of cryptococcal infections of late. But still, we do come across in fact, last year in our hospital, we had two patients with cryptococcal meningitis and one patient with cryptococcal pneumonia, and another patient with the cryptococcal lymphadenitis. So still occurs, we have to keep in mind. So this is it's a publication by Nina Singh et al. She looked at the association between or the impact of calcineurin inhibitors on the mortality with cryptococcosis. What she found was what I was talking earlier, like use of tacrolimus and cyclosporin was associated with improved survival, maybe because of the direct antifungal effect by these calcineurin inhibiting agents. Now, talking about Candida, there are several species of Candida which are actually causing infections worldwide. The various species of Candida which can cause significant infections are Candida albicans, Candida parapsilosis, glabrata, tropicalis, guillermondi, krusei, and then Off-Late auris. If you look at the data from India and the rest of the world, you can see that the rest of the world, it's still Candida albicans is the most predominant organism, more than 50%, 40%. But in India, Candida albicans only 40%. Other organisms like Tropicalis, Guillermondi, other species predominate. This is our observation also in Lakeshore Hospital also. About 70% is Candida non-albicans. The significance is that Candida albicans typically respond to fluconazole, but other species of Candida may not respond to fluconazole, which means they may have to be put on echinocandins or other triazole. So differentiation of this or the characterization of the Candida species is very important. So it's very essential to have a good microbiology department who can help you to identify the various species so that the appropriate treatment can be started. Candida auris is a recent pathogen, like I think it was recognized only a couple of years ago. This is actually resistant to very, very organisms, and it is sensitive only to echinocandins. I think mycophenolate is probably the drug of choice, but it's actually we had a couple of patients with Candida auris, and then this patient had Candida auris in the urine, kidney and urinary tract, and as you all know, echinocandins don't get into the urinary tract very well. So despite mycophenolate, about the urinary excretion is about 10%, and despite giving mycophenolate, because that's all we could use, and we lost the patient. So Candida auris is actually emerging as a major pathogen nowadays. So these are various risk factors for the various types of Candida species. Candida tropicalis is often in neutropenic patients following bone marrow transplantation. Candida krusei can occur fluconazole use, and glabrata following GA surgery, vascular catheters, etc. And Candida parapsilosis often complicates patients with who are taking parenteral nutrition and who have vascular catheters. This is a problem in our dialysis patients. Like they have long lines, tunnel catheters, etc., and which can get infected with the parapsilosis. And this organism just wouldn't go. Like no matter whatever you give, and the treatment is actually you have to take the catheter out. Otherwise, this may lead to infective endocarditis and complications related to that. So this is a presentation. This is a graph by Neophytos. The study which I showed in the beginning itself. A study which looked at the various types of invasive fungal infection in organ transplant recipient. They found that there is significant morbidity in all types of invasive fungal infections, and this is all types of fungal infection. Invasive candidiasis, the mortality was higher with invasive candidiasis, and liver transplant recipient had the highest mortality. In fact, renal transplant recipient off the load, they are the least sick, and liver transplant recipients are the sickest because of the other comorbid conditions, and they had the highest mortality. And once a diagnosis of candidemia is made, or once candidemia is suspected, delaying the treatment can lead to increase in the mortality. Any delay in initiating the antifungal therapy can lead to significant rise in the mortality, like 10% mortality if it is instituted within 12 hours of diagnosis. And if it is delayed by 48 hours, the mortality can be as high as 30%. So if you suspect candidemia or if you diagnose candidemia, it's important to initiate treatment as early as possible. The problems with invasive fungal infections are they are difficult to diagnose. Their clinical features are very non-specific. They just present fever. Bacterial and viral infections also could present with fever. So there are actually very few methods or techniques by which we can identify fungal infection. Traditional microbiology techniques using microscopy and culture are insensitive. Only 10 to 20% of invasive candidiasis manifest Y-positive blood culture. And the turnaround time is very slow. The candida culture may be reported after 24 to 48 hours. By then it may be too late. And blood culture may not grow anything. You need to have the deep tissue specimen to obtain the to culture the organism, which may be difficult to obtain. So these are the problems in diagnosing fungal infections. This is a study which was published in the early 90s. This is an autopsy study, and this study showed that 15 to 30% of invasive fungal infection at autopsy never received any antifungal therapy, which means these 30 patients, if the diagnosis was suspected sufficiently early, it's possible that these patients could have been salvaged. So this is an autopsy study which was published in 1990.
No, I've got the link, but I'll take another 50.
This is a publication from Christian Medical College, Vellore in the early 80s by Dr. Date et al. Terminal infections in renal transplant recipient in a tropical environment. They found that 1/3 of patients who died, 1/3 of renal transplant patients who died had undiagnosed fungal infection. So, which again suggests or means that these patients, if the fungal infections were suspected sufficiently early, these patients could have been salvaged. So what are the various dilemmas in the management of fungal infections? Diagnosis itself is difficult. Clinical symptoms are not characteristics. Manifestations on imaging are not at all specific. Biopsy often impossible because often the deeper tissues are affected and patient may not be in a medically fit condition to undergo any surgery. Serologic tests are not universally available. Even though they are available, they are not very reliable. Sensitivity and specificity are relatively poor. And any delay in initiating treatment can be fatal. So how can risky patients be identified early? The only answer to this question is think fungus if predisposing factors are there. This is how one should approach fungal infection. dealing with a high-risk patient, for example, patient who's undergoing bone marrow transplantation, even if there is no infection, there is a role for prophylaxis. We don't deal with this category. Like in fact, in solid organ transplantation, particularly in renal transplantation, there is no role for prophylactic antifungal therapy. Maybe excepting in patients who are very immunosuppressed and then you want to immunosuppress further, there may be a role, but generally there is no role for prophylaxis in solid organ transplantation. The next category is the highest risk category with persistent fever antibiotics, possible fungal infection. Empirical therapy can be initiated. Again, high index of suspicion based on the signs and symptoms. Probable infection. You still haven't made a clear-cut diagnosis, nothing to prove fungal infection, but you have a very high index of fungal infection, and this is presumptive therapy. And then full-blown case with proven infection, specific treatment. So depending on the clinical situation, the clinician has to decide at what point in time the antifungal therapy has to be initiated. Who are the patients at risk of developing fungal infection in the ICU? Any patient in the hospital for more than 7 days with fever persisting despite multiple broad-spectrum antibiotics with no obvious source and after appropriate source control. If this particular patient has more than one of the following risk factors, like patient is getting total parenteral nutrition, has a central venous catheter, hemodialysis, patients on hemodialysis, patient has any immunodeficiency of variable origin, which includes diabetes, then a patient who's undergone a major abdominal surgery, patient was previously positive for multifocal candida colonization. These are actually, indications for starting empirical antifungal therapy. So what are the various pharmacological options we have? We have several categories of drugs which are available to as antifungal agents. We have polines, which act on the cell membranes, which include liposomal amphotericin B and the various lipid formulations of amphotericin. Then, of course, nystatin, which is an oral agent used for topical application. Then 5-fluorocytosine, that's also available. This drug was very popular once upon a time for the treatment of cryptococcosis and probably candidiasis also. Then it is not available for a long time. Then it's made a comeback recently. Then we have this echinocandin, which is a group of drugs which inhibit the cell wall synthesis. There are 3 drugs which belong to this category: caspofungin, micafungin, and anidulafungin. Then we have drugs which act in the cytoplasm. These are azole, triazoles, starting with the fluconazole, ketoconazole, itraconazole, voriconazole, posaconazole, and isavuconazole. I don't think isavuconazole is yet available in our country, and I have not used. I've used all other azoles in my clinical practice. If you look at the pharmacological properties of various triazoles, all of them have excellent bioavailability, probably excepting itraconazole, more than 90% for voriconazole. Even posaconazole is quite good. And metabolism is primarily in the liver. And the important thing to remember is they modulate the cytochrome CYP3A4 enzymes. So patients getting calcineurin inhibitors like tacrolimus and cyclosporin may have a change in the level, and the doses of cyclosporin and tacrolimus have to be monitored very, very closely, and often the doses have to be significantly reduced. So otherwise may result in tacrolimus or cyclosporin toxicity. So this is one thing which has to be kept in mind when you co-administer one of the triazole with the calcineurin inhibiting agent. And if you look at the spectrum of activity of these various triazoles and other groups of drugs, in fact, most of the azoles are fairly effective against various candida. But as you go down the spectrum, fluconazole is not effective against many candida species, but posaconazole and echinocandins and amphotericin are effective. And against aspergillus, it's only voriconazole and posaconazole, and maybe to a certain extent echinocandin, and of course amphotericins. And against hyaline molds and zygomycetes, it's only posaconazole and amphotericin. And what's the role of posaconazole with various species of in its activity against various species of Aspergillus? If you compare the MIC of posaconazole against the other drugs, it's actually quite good. The only drug which does better than posaconazole is actually amphotericin. For against zygomycetes like Rhizopus and Mucor also, the posaconazole is quite good, and the only drug which is better than posaconazole for this category of infections is actually amphotericin. Another important factor we have to consider when you use an antifungal agent is the tissue penetration. The drug may be effective against a particular virus, but it may not reach the target organ. So fluconazole is very good actually, but not very effective against a wide variety of fungals. But then it reaches practically all the tissues in the body. Then it's actually for oriconazole and posaconazole also, we don't have the complete information, but I think it's fairly good. It reaches most of the tissue, skin, and then brain, lungs also. Posaconazole entry in the brain into the lungs are also fairly satisfactory. Liposomal amphotericin is a problem. It doesn't reach the kidney and the urinary tract because the molecules are big, doesn't get excreted. And regarding echinocandin also, same issues there. It's not used for treatment of the fungal infections of the kidney and the urinary tract. And for CNS infections also, echinocandins are not recommended because they don't reach central nervous system. But patients with meningitis, amphotericin can be used because inflamed meninges actually will cause the permeation of this the drugs into the CSF. So what is the recommended treatment for candidiasis? Proven or suspected? In a non-neutropenic stable patient, the drug of choice is probably fluconazole. But now the recommendation is to give a echinocandin. The patient is sick. Even if the patient is not sick, often the recommendation is still to give echinocandin, but may not be possible all the time. So for a stable patient, one can consider giving fluconazole. The patient is critically ill, immunosuppressed, or has features of multi-organ system failure, one has to consider echinocandin or liposomal amphotericin. And for neutropenic patients, the drugs of choice are echinocandin or liposomal amphotericin. Amphotericin has a broader spectrum of power. Fluconazole is not active against Aspergillus and Fusarium. Fluconazole is not active against mucor infections and less effective against Candida glabrata. Posaconazole has the widest spectrum of coverage among the various triazoles. Echinocandins are not effective in Candida against Cryptococci, Mucor, Fusarium. And these are also not so effective in the case of Candida parapsilosis. So how to reduce amphotericin toxicity? All of us know that amphotericin is a toxic drug. The toxicity can be reduced by saline loading, and the drug has to be given in dextrose. And then, if possible, avoid the use of concomitant nephrotoxic drugs, correct hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, acidosis, which are complications of amphotericin nephrotoxicity, but can actually contribute to further toxicity, and use lipid formulations if possible. These are the various lipid formulations available. Of late, we use only this LiPANB or Ambisome or liposomal amphotericin. Ambisome is the original brand, and there are quite a few Indian brands are also available. I've used many of those brands, and they are quite effective actually. So what is the ideal duration of antifungal therapy? The first culture is positive and subsequent culture negative. Treat for 14 days or more and de-escalate if the culture becomes negative and if the patient is stable, and to a narrow spectrum agent and preferably an oral agent like Nazole. The cultures grow nothing. Stop therapy when the defervescence occurs or switch to an oral compound as the clinical condition allows. This is the IDSA guidelines for the treatment of aspergillosis. The drugs of choice are voriconazole and liposomal amphotericin. Both have A1 recommendation. So these are the drugs of choice. And combination therapy is also effective in the case of invasive aspergillosis. A combination of voriconazole with anidula funkin has been found to be quite effective. So this is something else. It's another option that can be considered patients who are not responding to amphotericin. So if we look at the targeted antifungal therapy for the various type of fungi, for Candida, the first line is fluconazole if it is Candida albicans or tropicalis, but other modes of therapy like echinocandin or triazoles can have to be considered, like if the organism is like Candida, Guillermondi, Parapsilosis, or Auris. And for aspergillus, the drugs of choice are voriconazole and liposomal amphotericin. The alternative drugs are echinocandins and posaconazole. And pseudosporium is voriconazole. And for fusarium, it's again voriconazole and liposomal amphotericin or posaconazole. Melanized fungi, the options are voriconazole and posaconazole. And for zygomycetes, which include mucor and rhizopus, the only two options are liposomal amphotericin and posaconazole. Zygomycetes or mucor, actually still the optimal management of this condition remains a challenge. The positive outcome in these patients is often enhanced by the surgical clearance as well, in addition to the medical treatment. So with good combination of posaconazole and amphotericin, and with the good surgical clearance, often you can achieve good response. So these are the classification of zygomycetes. We have murales and endophthalmians. So again, the mucorales, you have rhizopus and mucor. This is Basidiobolus and Conidiobolus. These are uncommon, but I've seen we had a transplant patient who developed Basidiobolus in the liver. And it's a surprise actually after renal transplantation. The moment it is picked up, he was initiated on a combination of posaconazole and liposomal amphotericin. Despite all the aggressive measures, we lost him. So this is a pretty lethal, infection, and most of the time, you would end up losing the patient. So, what are the various factors influencing the decision for administering a drug? So, type of fungus and the certainty of diagnosis. As I was discussing earlier, based on the fungus you have identified, you have to decide. Site of infection, CNS and urinary tract. Caspofungins or echinocandins don't reach CNS or urinary tract. There it is azoles, triazoles. And even liposomal amphotericin does not reach the urine. Again, the choice may be azoles. Risk of nephrotoxicity. The patient has significant renal dysfunction. Amphotericin could be a problem. Even liposomal amphotericin could be a problem, but then one has to be very careful. And ability of the oral bioavailability of the drug. Many of the triazoles are available as oral preparation, can be effectively used once the patient is actually started improving. Then other factors to be considered are interaction with the other concomitant drugs or antifungals, and then prior antifungal exposure, cross resistance can occur. For example, a patient who's received a fluconazole earlier may have cross resistance with other triazoles. And then patient's preference and ability to pay, like some of these antifungal agents like echinocandins and liposomal amphotericins are quite expensive. And immunosuppression is the other thing, like patients who are more immunosuppressed need aggressive treatment, and not so immunosuppressed may only need a less aggressive form of treatment. So summarizing, there has been a significant increase in the incidence of invasive fungal infection in the recent years. This has become important cause of morbidity and mortality in recipients of solid organ transplants. And Among the Candida, non-albicans Candida species are emerging as major pathogens in India, and some of these non-albicans Candida may not be sensitive to fluconazole, and other options may have to be considered. Fungal infections are difficult to diagnose because there is no definite, nothing very absolutely diagnostic of fungal infection. So it's a clinical suspicion, and delay in initiation of fungal treatment can be fatal. So to approach these issues, think of a fungus when the patient fails to improve. Which fungus is more common in your setup? For example, hematology, transplant, cancer, or ventilator patient, think of mold, that's Aspergillus, mucor, and Candida. And in a surgical ward like GI surgery, pancreatitis, etc., think of Candida. Echinocandins are good choice for Candida, and Ambisome when you are not certain. When you start empirical therapy, when you strongly suspect a fungal infection, but continue to search for pathogens. And the choice of the drug is actually dependent on many, many factors. This is the kingdom of fungi, and they are there in the environment. See, like most of us, the so-called immunocompetent people may not be affected by that, but immunocompromised people are at a higher, very, very high risk of developing, problems with these, apparently innocuous organisms. Thank you.
Dr. Vijit, kindly coordinate for the questions.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for such an enlightening lecture on post-transplant fungal infection. I'm sure audience gained a lot of insights on post-transplant fungal infections. Sir, we have few audience questions for you. The first question is from Dr. Deepak. He's asking, what are the common risk factors for fungal infection, particularly in patients with renal transplant?
Patients who have received extra immunosuppression, for example, patients who have a graft dysfunction requiring multiple anti-rejection treatment, patients who have received depleting antibodies are at a high risk. But even then, even stable renal transplant patients can develop fungal infection because of the increased environmental exposure. The recent fungal infection that I've seen in our practice actually not in patients who have received extra immunosuppression. They were actually primarily because of increased environmental exposure. So this has to be kept in mind. So even without extra immunosuppression, due to increased environmental exposure, renal transplant recipients can develop fungal infections.
Sir, next question is from Dr. Kunal. He's asking, do you recommend screening for Candida colonization of urinary tract for renal transplant candidates?
We do a surveillance culture for all patients before they undergo transplant. So I guess that will pick it up. Okay. We don't do any other screening. Like maybe I think in a setting of bone marrow transplantation or liver transplantation, it's probably more important because their preemptive therapy is also required.
Yes. So the next question is from Dr. Shobha. She's asking how to differentiate a colonization, Candida colonization from infection.
We have to go by the clinical features. For example, Candida in the urine, it may not mean anything. Like patient who has had a catheter, who has had some procedure, Candida in the urine may not be pathogenic. But then the patient has typical features of infection like fever, loin pain, or pain in the graft, then you have to consider pyelonephritis. And the problem with Candida in the urine is very difficult to treat actually. Our therapeutic options are very, very limited. Only azoles can be used. And even these azoles, even fluconazole, can interact with your calcineurin agents. I mean, recently, we've had a problem like, the interaction with the cyclosporin or tacrolimus is probably least with fluconazole as compared to voriconazole, posaconazole. Even then, one of our patients developed significant TAC toxicity and developed problems related to that. So I think the patient is otherwise asymptomatic. There is no issue. Just follow up the patient. But if there is features of systemic infection, then you treat. Otherwise, I would suggest that a closer follow-up is probably all that is needed.
Sir, next question is from Dr. Nazma. She is asking, what is your strategy for quick diagnosis of systemic mycosis in cases of justified suspicion?
Unfortunately, there is no such strategy exists. Like, it is your clinical decision.
Yes.
If you think the patient is having a fever or an infection, not responding to your standard antibacterial agents, and that is a situation for considering antifungal therapy. No quick test available.
Sir, next question is from Dr. Deepak. He's asking, what are the recommended agents for candida infection post renal transplant?
Candida, yeah. See, I would say, like, if the patient has a significant candida infection, I would go for an echinocandin, either caspofungin or Hydrilla fungin or micafungin. I would say that is probably the best, because azoles interact significantly with calcineurin inhibitors, so may cause problems in the level. So my first preference will be an echinocandin.
Sir, my question, amongst echinocandin, which echinocandin you will prefer? Caspo, Anudula, or?
All three. See, like, all three are, I've used all three. I'm continuing to use all three. I don't think there is much to choose among them, because the only thing that micafungin, like, one vial is for 50 milligram, so it's cheaper. So that way, I think micafungin is, we often use micafungin. But otherwise, if you look at the efficacy and the tissue penetration, I believe all three are the same. There's nothing much to choose among them.
Sir, next question is from Dr. Deepa. She's asking, how do you approach mucor infection in renal transplant recipients?
In renal transplant recipients, the type of mucor infections are, one is rhinocerebral mucormycosis. These patients can present with, proptosis, painful eye, and then prominence over the maxillary area, and or non-specific lung infection like fever and X-ray showing this consolidation. And if you suspect, you have to go for an HRCT, and then if you suspect rhinocerebral mucormycosis, get the ENT doctors into the picture early, let him undergo the surgical procedure. Meantime, if your clinical suspicion is very strong, start him on liposomal. I would say combination of liposomal amphotericin and posaconazole. Give both, because it's a very life-threatening condition, and if you start, unless you start early and aggressively, you are likely to lose the patient.
Dr. Bhargav का फोन आया था, वो आ गए हैं. उन्होंने शायद स्क्रीन भी शेयर किया. देखेंगे पीपीटी इसमें दिख रहा है.
Sir, last question.
अपना पीपीटी का भी स्क्रीन शेयर किया है.
अच्छा.
तो आ चुके हैं. दो क्वेश्चन के बाद मैं खत्म करवाता हूँ. स्टार्ट करेंगे.
Sir, last question. What is the duration of post-renal transplant antifungal prophylaxis in high-risk cases?
Generally, there is no role for fungal prophylaxis in renal transplant, because we don't do that on a regular basis. But then the patient is very, very immunosuppressed. Like, we need to immunosuppress further. It's a clinician choice, maybe a few weeks. But there are no standard guidelines or recommendation for preemptive or prophylactic antifungal therapy in renal transplant recipients.
Sir, in a renally compromised patient, will you recommend posaconazole as a first choice therapy or liposomal amphotericin B?
Either posaconazole or liposomal amphotericin. Depending on the situation, I could go for either of these.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a elaborative session on antifungal treatment of post-renal transplant fungal infection. Now I hand over the session to our SBU head and Senior Vice President, Mr. Manoj Kumar, for introducing our next speaker.
Thank you.
my profuse thanks to Dr. A.B. Abraham for making it so lively and lucid. That's the okay, sir. You always make things look so simple for all of us. Thanks indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, an honor and privilege to introduce the second expert for tonight, Dr. Rahul Bhargav, Director and Head of Hemato-Oncology at Stem Cell Transplant at prestigious Fortis Memorial, Gurgaon. Dr. Bhargav has been previously associated with leading hospitals of Delhi NCR, such as Artemis Hospital and Medanta Medicity. He has successfully conducted more than 1,000 bone marrow transplant. Owing to his vast experience in the field, Dr. Bhargav is considered as one of the leading stem cell transplant experts in Delhi NCR and in the country. First Indian doctor to do and popularize stem cell transplant in multiple sclerosis. Dr. Rahul Bhargav is actively involved with the community in building awareness around various blood disorders, several publications to his credit and in peer-reviewed journal, both nationally and internationally, and is always an invited speaker at various national and international conferences. Sir, an honor and privilege to invite you for your talk. Dr. Rahul Bhargav, please.
Sir, please unmute your mic, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Manoj, for this wonderful introduction for organizing such a wonderful talks on a Friday evening. And Dr. AB, thanks a lot for holding the audiences for 1 hour as I was on ABN Live for talking about Corona in up north, how the numbers are growing. So from a Corona heated debate from a politics to an academic scientific meeting is always difficult, but I will try to do some justice. Because what I'm not going to do is not going to take you through the overview of all the infections during bone marrow transplant. What my idea of today is just to highlight few things and request Intas to bring this drug which has to be available in the country for CMV, because the number of transplants are growing and so are the infections like CMV and BK viruses, and they do contribute quite a lot to the supportive care during down the time for haplotransplants as well as MUT. You will not be surprised that almost 90% people do get a reactivation with CMV. And once they get reactivated, they don't stop. It just goes on and on and on. It just, the numbers keeps on leaping every week by week before you intervene. And moment you intervene with your current strategy of ganciclovir, foscarnet is not available. Now cidofovir is available, but cidofovir is a very, very weak drug. So what you're left with is ganciclovir, and believe me, it's not a kind drug. Renal toxicity, renal interactions, leading to lower platelet counts, marrow suppression, and certain times, 5 to 8% times, poor graft function because of the CMV and ganciclovir. So you see, you spend 20 lakh rupees on a transplant, your graft is functioning well, you start the ganciclovir, and by day 70, your graft stops functioning. You're a pancytopenic person. And nothing else has happened, only the CMV copy numbers was 100,000, and you started ganciclovir, and 2 weeks down the line, your graft has stopped functioning. This is how bad the CMV and ganciclovir could be. So what we're going to talk about is patient of CMV infection, because we are all IgG positive. I mean, everybody knows about the IgG in this Corona times because everybody is worried about IgG. I mean, they want IgG, but for somehow India, 100% people are positive for IgG CMV infection. It means they had certain infection in the past, which was cleared beautifully by the body itself. Okay, so let me put this down. So just a minute. Okay. So CMV reactivation following SCT, single center study assessed by rates of CMV infection in transplant via antigenemia from 2000 to 2010. Conventional transplant, which was sibling transplant, was merely 13% to 38%. But while it goes to T-cell depleted transplants, which is being done basically for immunodeficiency and other things, it goes up to 66%. But what is more important we need to understand is the PP65 antigenemia assays is long gone. So the simplest and the lowest stat which is now available is PCR. So you send a PCR today, and tomorrow morning you'll get the CMV PCR report. And post survival keeps on getting down and down if your CMV is positive, which means 50% drop if you are positive for CMV. So that's quite a lot where that survival starts going down. So risk of CMV infection in patient undergoing transplants depends upon sero status, which is all we are positive. T cell status, we don't do too much of a depleted unless it is an autoimmune disorder, autoimmune disorders or immunodeficiency disorders. Till that time, you don't do a depleted one. Medication, ATG, very well used in sibling transplants, MUD and haplos. Prednisolone equivalent, yes, because GVHD will occur in 20% of patients as shown, and the donor types are mismatched, haplo and cord. So hopefully cords are not happening. Yes, haplo are happening more often than not. So haplos are growing at 15 to 20% rate. So still, believe me, India does only 2,700 transplants, where the US does 27,000 transplants every year. So that's the 10% of US what we are doing. So donor CMV seropositivity increases the risk of CMV reactivation in relation to recipient sero status. Management of CMV infections and undergoing transplants, antivirals or prophylaxis can be given as shown in fungal. You preempt the thing, give posaconazole prophylaxis, but in CMV, that's not much of a strategy at this present moment of time. Prevents infection, potentially prevents secondary effects, but the cause is unnecessary drug toxicities are the problem, and it's an expensive medication as well. Preemptive therapy has been the preferred strategy over past decade, currently recommended by the NCC, and not like fungus, where prophylaxis has become the standard. So consideration, real-time PCRs 14 days onwards every week till day 100, because where the CDT or CD4-CD8 ratio gets reversed, T cell starts coming back, and that's where your immunity starts going back to normal. So threshold for initiation is as less as 137 copy numbers, and in low risk more than 500 copy numbers. Believe me, but the copy numbers, if they are present, if you are immunosuppressed for till day 100, believe me, you can't get away with that. Whatever the copy numbers are, they are going to grow. So frequency of high-risk patients, and believe me, haplo transplant, we have seen the CMV going on for 1 year plus. Okay, it means that the immunity has not returned back. It means the T cells have not returned back to their normal status. That is why the CMV just keeps on persisting at that low level. So PP65 antigenemia, we are not going to talk because that's not now the standard of care. So FDA-approved things are ganciclovir, valganciclovir, foscarnet, and cidofovir. Cidofovir cost 43,000 for an injection. Foscarnet, one time if you give for 5 days, costs around ₹1,00,000, and ganciclovir costs around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees every day you give it, and that you have to give it for 14 days, first BD dosing, and then continuously OD dosing for 21 days. So valganciclovir 900 mg PO BID, ganciclovir is 5 mg per kg IV BID, foscarnet is 90 mg, and cidofovir is 5 mg. Every single drug comes with its own problems. Ganciclovir comes with marrow suppression. Foscarnet, cidofovir comes with renal toxicity. And cidofovir is the only drug probably which also works for the BK virus. And believe me, another one is the BK virus, which is not a so kind viruses which you need to see on a day-to-day basis. Hemorrhagic cystitis in 5% of people, and those people suffer hell during bone marrow transplant. So antiviral resistance is a common mechanism. Consider rising viral load on antiviral after initial viral suppression, failure of viral load to decrease by at least 1 log after antiviral induction therapy for 7 days. Resistance are more commonly exposed people who have prolonged exposure to antivirals, persistent antinemia, and viral dosing has to be altered because of reasons. And the mutation in UL97 is common, confers resistance to ganciclovir or only and developed after ganciclovir exposure. So it is not the funguses alone who can be resistant. Viruses can also lead to infection, resistance, patterns of resistance, get resistant to ganciclovir when you have to use foscarnet. So luckily we didn't had much of a problem in past 10 years. We have used foscarnet and we have been able to get away with that. So this is a 45-year-old female who presented with myelodysplastic syndrome, transplanted, T-cell depleted, positive remission. So what do you do? Emerging strategies for managing CMV infection in patients undergoing bone marrow transplant. So this is the drug which we have used just now. letermovir. Believe me, first patient used, she's suffering from a BK virus on day 75, hematuria. She has undergone internal iliac artery blockage, temporary blockage, but still she's pouring out blood. We don't know what to do, but yes, what is reassuring in this patient is, yes, 0 CMV copy numbers till day 75. CMV has got no reactivation. 240 milligram once a day. He has spent already 10 lakh rupees on letermovir. So 1 month therapy is 5 lakh rupees is what is at this present moment of time. And this is how the letermovir has done very well. So see the first column of 240 milligrams, 6% virologic failure, drug adverse effects, none, serious effects probably less than 26%, but we haven't seen anything at this present moment of time. So this 240 milligram has got a fast track approval, letermovir for CMV prophylaxis treatment. Another one is brincidofovir for CMV prophylaxis in patients receiving transplants. 100 milligram tablet, again, is a placebo. And this is what you see, a fantastic clinical significant CMV reactions. Week 24, 51 versus 52, not 0 to 14, 24, 32, 14 to 24, 22, 11, which was non-significant, and see the side effects. So trial did not meet the primary endpoints at this present moment of time. Another drug which was the talk of the town in this time ASCT meeting in February, maribavir for CMV management in patients receiving transplants. Maribavir 100 milligrams versus 400 versus placebo. Maribavir 400 to 1200 milligram BD for patients with CMV infection resistant to standard antivirals. Another one is the adopted T cell therapy, which is CTCLs, which can be used, blood drawn, T cell harvested, CMV specific T cell generated, and CMV specific T cell infused in hematopoietic recipients. And late stage trials for T cell immunotherapy for undergoing transplants are going on. But again, this is not available. But as the CAR T cell journey is going to start, probably we are going to soon get this adoptive CMV, CTLs, cytotoxic T cells, which is going to be the state-of-the-art therapy for tackling the CMV. Donor CMV as a preemptive therapy for undergoing transplants. So safety and efficacy has been decided. Single center phase 1 trial has shown the efficacy. Vaccines which are in development for CMV management in patient undergoing transplants are following: ASP 0113, CMV modified, Ankara triple vaccine, and other ones which are being utilized to tackle CMV infections. So this is where we come to an end of the talk. Why we wanted to show you this, that instead of thinking of bacterial infection, bacterial is another game. So at Fortis, what we have started is a CARBA-R, where you can actually modulate or you can understand the mechanism of Klebsiella resistance and can utilize Zevicefta and Astronom in combination or Zevicefta alone. That's one of the changes which we have brought in. Second is a PCR-based modality. Exciton has really helped us. Sometimes when all the cultures are negative and you send an Exciton sample, you tend to get various bugs out of that. And major important thing is letermovir, which has become the standard for all of us, which has actually worked well for us. Another thing which we have happened in 5 patients of mucormycosis, 3 have undergone a bone marrow transplant successfully after undergoing the resection of the lung and so on and so forth. So mucormycosis, again, if you tackle it properly in terms of amphotericin along with posaconazole and surgery, people do survive. It's not that all people die, but thus it has to be a longish 4 weeks of amphotericin, which you have to have a pain of managing the side effects in terms of hypokalemia and renal dysfunction. And third and the fourth, the largest thing is a BK virus. So you have to be worried, very, very worried about people who are doing transplants for the BK virus associated hemolytic cystitis. So we are trying to write up a paper and let's see what it comes out. So with this, we thank everybody for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this crisp and insightful lecture on post-transplant CMV infection. And now, sir, there are 2 or 3 questions for you on particularly this CMV. So first question is, sir, comparison between RT-PCR and antigenemia assay.
So I think gone are the days where you used to antigenemia. PCR is much more sensitive. So antigen has to be forgotten now. PP65, all those things, just forget about it. Start sending the PCRs. It's much more sensitive, picks up the lower copy numbers and that is more useful to track it down, that how people are behaving on a PCR, and the turnaround time has also come down, and the cost also. After pushing SRL, the cost has plummeted down to 3,000 rupees. So I think gone are the days for antigenemia. PCR has the standard.
Sir, prophylaxis therapy or preemptive therapy, which do you recommend?
So
CMV?
prophylaxis is again has not got foothold. It is all preemptive. So prophylaxis actually with letermovir has become standardized, but because of Indian Jugaad, 5 lakh rupees a month tablet, the moment you engraft, you start giving letermovir. But in the earlier studies and now which are studies which are coming on, the moment you put a graft, you can actually start with letermovir, and that can be given as a prophylaxis. So in terms of prophylaxis like a posaconazole prophylaxis, yes, letermovir is the drug for prophylaxis, neither the preemptive therapy. Preemptive therapy is all ganciclovir, 5 milligram per kg body weight, twice a day, once a day, depending on what are the copy numbers.
Sir, what is the prevalence of ganciclovir resistant CMV? According
so
to
be
your
honest, various data which we look at, less than 5% probably, because up till now majority of people were not monitoring so stringently because people were doing more of a sibling transplants. At our center, I would say probably less than 1%. I hardly remember 1 or 2% who were copy numbers were going on ganciclovir when we changed it from one brand to another, and they responded. So we were all getting United Biotech ganciclovir. We changed over to Natco and people responded. So there has to be something with a drug. So I haven't, to be honest, I can't say we have got a high patterns of resistance at this present moment of time.
So the next question is, what is the treatment of ganciclovir resistant CMV?
Foscarnet.
Foscarnet. Sir, next question is on fungal infection. How do you approach risk stratification for invasive fungal infection in patient with hematological malignancy?
So if you want a bookish answer, then you can have umpty number of pages from any book which you can find out. Low risk, high risk, intermediate risk, GVHDs are high risk, myelomas are low risk, and so on and so forth. But cut the long story short, in hematological malignancies, let's put it this way, AML, they are all high risk. Put the patient on posaconazole prophylaxis, you are going to save money. The posaconazole itself is going to cost you 50,000-60,000 rupees, but that's a peanut which you have to pay if you develop a fungal infection. On posaconazole, breakthrough rates are 18%. 18% people will require amphotericin, but that's okay. But rest 72%, 82% people have will be saved from getting amphotericin. All ALL patients, unless they are diabetic or suffering from any other comorbid conditions like liver dysfunction and other things, they're all low risk. So you can actually go ahead and get fluconazole in induction strategy. Myelomas, all are low risk. Lymphomas, all are low risk. But when it comes to transplant, sibling transplants are generally considered as a low risk, while in haplo and mud transplant, because it takes a longer time, they are considered high risk. All people who are on GVHD treatment, they are considered high risk. So posaconazole as utilized at that moment of time. So in hematological malignancies, give more prophylaxis with posaconazole rather than waiting to give it with anything. In our transplant centers, because of a higher side effect, higher interaction with the other agents like busulfan and so on and so forth, our policy is now moving towards more of echinocandin as a prophylaxis for first 14 to 16 days till the time patient is engrafting. And once he engraft, there's no loose motions, mucositis is gone, then you shift over to posaconazole tablets, because tablet has got a better bioavailability than the syrup. And we are also trying to start the posaconazole levels, where we are going to come back to Intas and say, okay, good guys, do a co-branding, sponsor some coupons for posaconazole levels.
Sir, next question is timing of initiation and cessation of IFI prophylaxis in immunocompromised patients undergoing HSCT.
So the moment you start a conditioning regime, you should put the patient on prophylaxis, and the moment the engraftment takes place in autologous transplants, you can stop one, which is fluconazole. Okay, but for an haplo transplants and mud transplant, up to 90 days, you have to continue giving antifungal prophylaxis.
Sir, your choice of agent for post-engraftment anti-mold prophylaxis.
Posaconazole. So it has to be posaconazole, guys. The only thing which I'm fighting right now is mucormycosis. So posaconazole prophylaxis actually reduces aspergillosis and as mucormycosis. And once you develop mucor, guys, it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of antifungal therapy, surgery. It's messy. So people do relapses during the time, and they're waiting for their surgeries and recovery. So it is difficult. So let's not go that path of developing mucormycosis. Aplastic anemia, you find a patient on aplastic anemia, you can't do a transplant or you are waiting for ATG. Put the patient on posaconazole, cyclosporin and Revolade and ask them to go whichever place. At least they will not die because of infection. Or once they reach to a place where the transplant can be done, their cost will be saved. What I've realized in bone marrow transplant in this country, when people say it is costly, I would say let's make sure that your infection rates are less than 10% and you are saving 2 to 3 lakh rupees in every transplant, because that's where the cost comes in. So infections are to be tackled in the most stringent and aggressive manner.
Yes. Sir, regarding treatment of mucormycosis, a combination of amphotericin B and posaconazole, do you recommend, or only amphotericin B?
Yes. So amphotericin plus posaconazole both.
Both. Okay, sir. And sir, last question, recommended serum concentration of posaconazole to avoid IFIs after chemotherapy or HSCT?
Perfect. So the simple answer is I don't know. Once we start the levels, surely 2 months time, I'll come back to you.
Okay, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a highly informative session from your side. And now I hand over the session to our division head, Mr. Arun Chadda, sir, for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Abhijit, and thank you, Dr. Rahul. It was a really nice talk, and so we have come to an end of webinar on update on the effective preventive and management of the post-transplant fungal infection. I, Arun Chadda, Senior General Manager, Intas Pharmaceutical, would like to thank you for the overwhelming response from all the 300 plus participants. And I would like to thank our honorable speaker, Dr. A.B. Ibrahim sir and Dr. Rahul Bhargav sir for today's wonderful talk. And I'm sure the participants would have learned a great deal out of it. And these talks would guide them during their practice also. Once again, thank you for your gracious presence, and it's our commitment to continuously organize these events. Till then, stay safe and take care. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr.
Bye.
Ibrahim. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Dr. AB, thanks a lot for saving my skin today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much, sir. Good
Good night.
night, sir.
Right.